She had never expected a 15-minute walk to feel like hours. The evening air carried a gentle chill, soft enough to make her hug herself slightly, yet inviting in its quiet calm. Marielle glanced at the fading sunlight through the narrow streets, her backpack sliding comfortably against her shoulder, and noticed that Lucas, her classmate, walked beside her without speaking. It was strange how someone could be so close yet so distant. They weren't friends in any meaningful way, not yet. School had placed them in the same project group, and for reasons she didn't fully understand, she had agreed to walk him home after their late library session. The streets were almost empty, the hum of distant traffic punctuating the silence between them. Marielle's mind wandered to the oddity of the evening. The trees lining the streets cast shadows like soft lace across the pavement. Each step she took seemed to echo louder than it should, each footfall a reminder that time was stretching in ways that made her both impatient and hesitant. Lucas occasionally glanced at her, but there was a careful neutrality in his expression that didn't invite conversation. Or perhaps it did, and she was just too shy to notice. "Do you live far from here?" she finally asked, her voice almost timid in the emptiness of the street. Lucas shrugged lightly, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "Not too far, about 10 minutes from here." "What about you?" Marielle hesitated, noticing how different it felt to answer him now that the city seemed quieter, as if their walk had transported them to a place outside of school rules and schedules. "I'm closer, maybe 7 minutes." Her voice carried a small laugh at the absurdity of trying to measure distance in minutes while walking side by side with someone whose presence felt heavier than usual. The conversation stalled, drifting into an uneasy pause. Marielle found herself aware of every detail, the sound of his shoes against the pavement, the occasional rustle of leaves, even the way his scarf hung loosely around his neck. She realized with a small, unsettling flutter that she was noticing him in ways she hadn't before. They passed a quiet park where the benches were empty and the swings swayed slightly in the evening breeze. Marielle's eyes lingered on the motion, and she thought fleetingly how it mirrored the uncertainty in her own chest. It was just a simple walk, and yet it felt like a delicate balancing act between the ordinary and the strangely profound. "You always take this route home?" she asked, attempting to sound casual but failing to hide the curiosity in her voice. Lucas gave a small nod. "Usually, it's quieter than the main roads, and I like the trees." His gaze drifted upward briefly, watching the orange glow of the sun dip behind the horizon. Marielle caught herself holding her breath, sensing that the moment was quietly important, though she couldn't name why. A cool wind brushed against her cheek, making her shiver slightly. Lucas noticed and shifted closer, a subtle gesture that didn't go unnoticed by her. She felt an odd mix of comfort and anticipation, as if the world had paused to let them exist in this delicate, unspoken space. Marielle thought about how strange it was that ordinary moments could suddenly feel monumental. She wasn't sure if it was the soft light, the calm street, or the unusual closeness of someone she barely knew. Maybe it was all of it. The walk stretched on, not because of distance, but because of the silent acknowledgement that something between them was changing, imperceptibly but unmistakably. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. As they approached a small intersection, Lucas slowed slightly, glancing down the side street that branched off. Marielle noticed the hesitation in him, a fleeting shadow crossing his features, and she couldn't help but wonder what thoughts might be lingering behind those quiet eyes. There was a tension in the pause, a sense that the simple act of turning could shift everything between them, and it left her chest tight with anticipation. The night was deepening around them, and as the streetlights flickered on, their shadows stretched long and thin, intertwining just slightly before separating again. Marielle felt a shiver, not entirely from the cold, but from the unspoken possibilities hanging in the air, heavy and fragile. The streetlights hummed softly, casting pools of golden light that seemed to slow time as Marielle and Lucas walked side by side. She kept stealing glances at him, noticing the way his hands occasionally brushed the strap of his backpack, the small way his shoulders shifted with each step. The quiet of the evening made even minor movements feel significant. Marielle's thoughts wandered back to the library, to the scattered papers and books that had brought them together in the first place. She remembered the sound of his laughter when a joke had slipped out during their group discussion. It was the kind of laugh that lingered, warm and unforced, the sort of thing that made her chest feel unexpectedly lighter. She hadn't realized until now how small moments like that could echo in her mind, replaying themselves in quiet clarity long after they had passed. Lucas spoke without looking at her, his voice low and calm. "I like walking at this hour. Everything feels quieter, slower." Marielle nodded, feeling that same weight in her chest. "Yes, it's like the world pauses, just enough for you to notice the little things." She smiled softly, realizing that she was talking more freely than she usually did, perhaps because the street's emptiness offered a kind of intimacy she hadn't expected. They passed a row of closed cafes, the smell of freshly baked bread from earlier in the day still clinging faintly in the air. Marielle inhaled deeply, and it reminded her of Sunday mornings at home, when her mother would make pastries, the scent drifting through the kitchen. A small, nostalgic smile tugged at her lips. Lucas glanced at her, as if sensing the memory that lingered on her face, and for a brief moment their eyes met, holding something unspoken between them. Her mind flickered to the strange sensation she had felt when they first left the library, the odd mix of anticipation and hesitancy. Why did a simple walk feel so drawn out? She tried to push the thought away, focusing instead on the street ahead, the way shadows from the trees danced across the pavement. Lucas's voice broke into her thoughts again. "Do you ever feel like some moments are bigger than they should be, like they stretch longer than the time you're actually in them?" Marielle froze slightly, surprised at the resemblance to her own thoughts. "Yes," she admitted softly. "Exactly that. It's strange, isn't it?" He nodded, his gaze fixed ahead, and the quiet that followed seemed to hum with significance. Marielle felt her pulse quicken. The night had settled around them, wrapping them in a calm that was almost sacred. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the faint whisper of wind, felt amplified, as if the world had condensed into this small stretch of sidewalk, just for them. She tried to recall if she had ever felt this kind of tension before, this delicate balance between familiarity and something new. It was unsettling in the most fascinating way, drawing her attention to every detail she might have otherwise overlooked. The streetlights reflected off a puddle nearby, rippling slightly with the breeze. Marielle bent her gaze to watch the reflection of Lucas's shadow stretch alongside hers. "Sometimes I think we don't notice things until the world gives us a pause," Lucas said, almost to himself, his tone contemplative. Marielle felt a lump in her throat, the truth of his words resonating deeply within her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They walked in tandem, moving quietly, as if the silence itself held answers neither of them could yet articulate. The world seemed suspended in the golden glow of the lamps, the soft hum of distant traffic fading into the background. Marielle's heart felt full and fragile at once, aware that this simple walk had shifted something between them, something undefined, lingering like a soft echo in her chest. As they neared a quiet crosswalk, Lucas stopped abruptly, causing her to almost bump into him. He looked down at her, eyes catching the light in a way that made her catch her breath. I didn't expect tonight to feel like this," he said quietly, and Marielle realized that she felt the same way. The words weren't necessary, but they settled in the space between them like an unspoken agreement. Marielle swallowed, her mind buzzing with 1,000 thoughts she couldn't fully articulate. The walk, which should have been brief and ordinary, had become a delicate exploration of silences, glances, and fleeting moments. The weight of it pressed softly against her chest, gentle but insistent. As they stood there, poised at the edge of the crosswalk, she felt a sudden awareness that something was about to change, something delicate and unspoken. The night seemed to hold its breath with them, waiting for the next step. The streetlights flickered slightly as they began walking again, the rhythm of their footsteps merging with the soft evening hum. Marielle felt a quiet awareness settle over her, an almost magnetic focus on the small details. The way Lucas's coat brushed against his arms, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the subtle rise and fall of his voice as he murmured about trivial things. yet every detail felt layered with meaning, as if the ordinary had quietly shifted into something extraordinary. Marielle's thoughts drifted to school, to the weeks of passing him in the hallways without truly seeing him. How had he seemed so ordinary before, yet now felt impossible to ignore? She remembered the way he had smiled during the library project, an easy, almost imperceptible lift of his lips that now felt like it had held the weight of some secret. She wondered if he noticed how much the world seemed to slow whenever they walked together. "You always seem so thoughtful," Lucas said suddenly, breaking the silence. His eyes were fixed on the pavement, but there was a softness in his tone that made Marielle look up sharply. She caught the shadow of a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I guess I think a lot," she admitted, surprised at her own openness, "especially when things feel different. Tonight feels different." He nodded, and for a fleeting second their steps fell into perfect unison. Marielle felt a warmth rise in her chest, though it wasn't the kind that came from romantic thought. It was the quiet comfort of being seen, of sharing a fleeting connection in the middle of a calm evening. The city around them seemed muted, as if their little world had separated itself from the noise and movement of the night. A narrow alley appeared to their right, its darkness deeper than the surrounding streets. Marielle glanced at it, but instinctively stayed close to the light. Lucas noticed her pause and matched her pace, their shadows stretching long on the pavement. She realized that his presence had become strangely grounding, a subtle reassurance in the midst of all the uncertainty the evening had stirred. "Do you ever feel like time bends?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like a short walk can feel endless, or a long day can disappear in a heartbeat." Lucas's gaze lifted for a moment, his eyes catching hers briefly. "Yes, I think that happens when moments matter more than we expect." His words hung in the air between them, delicate and precise, and Marielle felt a shiver, not of cold, but of something unspoken, almost tender. They passed a quiet fountain in the town square, water glinting in the lamplight. Marielle paused, drawn to the reflection of the lights on the rippling surface. She thought about how strange it was that something so ordinary could feel suddenly profound. The walk had become more than just a path home. It was a series of small, imperceptible revelations, moments that quietly reshaped the way she understood the night, and perhaps herself. Lucas stopped beside her at the fountain, peering down at the water. "It's strange, isn't it?" he said softly. "A walk, nothing remarkable, but it ends up feeling like it matters." Marielle nodded, aware that her heartbeat was slightly faster than it had been before. "Yes, I feel that too. Like this evening is longer than it should be, but for reasons I can't explain." The words hung between them, simple and yet oddly charged. There was no need for further explanation. They both understood the quiet weight of shared reflection. Marielle felt her thoughts narrowing, concentrating on the simple fact of being side by side with someone who seemed to notice the subtle hum of the world with her. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, carrying a hint of something familiar, perhaps the bakery on the corner, or the distant smell of night air warmed by the day. Marielle shivered and adjusted her coat. Lucas's gaze flicked toward her again, catching the movement, and something unspoken passed between them. I think this walk will stick with me," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "Even if it's just 15 minutes, it feels longer." Lucas's smile was quiet, unassuming, but there was a hint of understanding there. "I feel the same way," he said simply. As they continued down the street, Marielle realized that she was holding on to the moment, unwilling to let it slip into the ordinary, unwilling to let the quiet magic fade. The night had stretched in a way that made her feel both aware and suspended, each step heavier than it should have been, filled with unspoken curiosity and gentle tension. When the corner of her street came into view, the subtle pause in their steps felt almost symbolic. Marielle didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how long this strange, quiet connection would last, but she sensed it had marked something in her. Something delicate, something fragile, yet undeniably real. The street corner felt different now, almost like a threshold. Marielle hesitated, as if stepping beyond it might break the fragile quiet they had shared. Lucas slowed too, his movements deliberate, almost hesitant. For a moment they just stood there, the night wrapping around them in a gentle hush. Marielle realized she had been holding her breath, caught between the comfort of shared silence and the nervous anticipation of what came next. She glanced at Lucas, noticing the subtle way his eyes caught the lamplight, the careful tilt of his head as if he too was feeling the unusual weight of the evening. It was strange, this sensation that something so ordinary, walking home, could feel so extraordinary. "You know," Lucas said softly, "I didn't think a walk could feel this long, not just in time, but like it actually matters." His voice was calm, but there was a depth to it that Marielle wanted to listen more closely, hang on to each word. Marielle nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I know exactly what you mean. It's like the world slowed down, just for us, even if only for a little while." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, feeling the cool air brush against her cheek. There was a quiet intimacy in the simplicity of their words, a shared understanding that didn't need embellishment. They started walking again, slower now, each step careful and measured. Marielle noticed how much more aware she had become of his presence, the small gestures, the way he adjusted his bag, the way he glanced at the street signs, as though mapping the path as much in thought as in reality. Each detail felt amplified, imbued with a significance she hadn't expected. "I feel like tonight will stay with me," she confessed, almost to herself, "even if tomorrow is just ordinary again." Lucas's eyes flicked to hers, catching the sincerity in her tone. "I think I feel the same way," he replied. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight, a quiet recognition that this moment was unlike the countless ordinary moments they had shared before. Marielle realized then that the walk wasn't just about reaching home. It was about noticing the flicker of light on the pavement, the gentle sway of trees, the unspoken rhythm of a companion beside you. It was strange how time could stretch, how 15 minutes could feel like hours when something unseen hung between you. As they turned onto a narrower street, Marielle felt a flicker of hesitation. The houses here were quiet, their lights dimmed for the evening. The soft hum of distant traffic faded, leaving only the muted sound of their footsteps. She glanced at Lucas, catching a subtle shift in his expression, a pause that mirrored her own. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, her voice gentle, "but in a good way." Lucas smiled faintly. "I think that's because sometimes words aren't needed. It's just this, right now." Marielle nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her chest. It was in the quiet that she noticed the smallest details, the way his shadow stretched beside hers, the faint sound of leaves rustling in the breeze, the subtle warmth that came from simply being near someone who understood, without needing explanations or gestures. They approached her street, and the familiar shapes of her home came into view. The walk had begun as a simple act of courtesy, a favor for a classmate, but it had quietly transformed into a delicate shared experience, something that left an impression far larger than the time it occupied. Marielle felt a bittersweet tug as she realized they were nearing the end. The evening air had grown cooler, but she felt an unexpected warmth in her chest, the kind that comes from unexpected connections and subtle, unspoken understanding. Lucas paused at the corner of her yard, turning slightly to face her. I'm glad I walked with you tonight," he said softly. There was a weight to his words, careful and sincere, and Marielle felt her chest tighten in response. "Me too," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but full of meaning. The simple exchange seemed enough, yet somehow insufficient to capture the quiet depth of the evening. As she stepped closer to her door, she felt a sudden awareness of the stillness around them. The night had stretched and folded in ways she hadn't expected, leaving behind a sense of something unspoken, something fragile and tender. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Marielle watched Lucas start to turn back toward his own path, and a small pang of longing threaded through her chest. The walk was almost over, yet she felt suspended in the memory of it, caught between the warmth of shared quiet and the inevitability of parting ways. The gentle glow of the streetlight lingered on his silhouette, and she realized that tonight's walk had become more than a routine. It had become a memory she couldn't easily let go of, a moment that stretched longer than it should have, and yet, in its quiet tension, it had changed something inside her. Marielle lingered at her doorstep for a moment, feeling the echo of the walk wrap around her like a soft, invisible thread. The night air had cooled, but it wasn't a chill that made her shiver. It was the memory of the quiet moments, the pauses between words, the subtle presence of someone who had unexpectedly become part of her evening. She thought about how ordinary the day had begun, with lectures, scattered assignments, and the usual bustle of school. Yet, in those brief minutes walking beside Lucas, time had slowed, stretched, and revealed details she hadn't known she could notice. The dim glow of streetlights, the faint rustle of leaves, even the hum of distant traffic had felt like they were part of something much larger than herself. Marielle closed the door behind her and leaned against it, letting herself breathe. She realized she had been holding in ways she hadn't even acknowledged: anticipation, curiosity, a quiet fascination that had grown with every step of the walk. It was remarkable, she thought, how someone could occupy a space so ordinary, yet leave such an imprint. Her mind drifted back to the way Lucas had paused at her corner, the simple sincerity in his words. "I'm glad I walked with you tonight." She replayed them softly, letting the simplicity of the statement sink in. No grand gestures, no declarations, just acknowledgement of shared experience. Yet somehow, that alone had shifted the evening, and perhaps the way she saw him. She wandered over to the window overlooking the street, catching the last flicker of lamplight reflecting off the pavement. A part of her wanted to see him again immediately, to extend the walk indefinitely, but she knew that the memory itself was precious, held in the quiet tension that had carried them together. It was fleeting, delicate, and entirely unforgettable. Marielle's thoughts moved to the concept of moments that matter. She had always believed that important experiences were loud, dramatic, unmistakable, yet tonight had taught her otherwise. Sometimes significance lived in silence, in pauses, in glances, in the simple act of walking beside someone without expectation or performance. That was the kind of weight she had carried with her all the way home, and now, even inside her room, it felt tangible. Her eyes lingered on the street outside, imagining Lucas making his way home, footsteps fading into the night. She felt a mix of gratitude and melancholy. Gratitude for having shared the walk, for the way it had made her notice the quiet layers of life, and melancholy for the inevitable return to ordinary routines. Still, she knew that the memory of tonight would remain, like a soft, glowing imprint etched into the familiar streets. Marielle sank into her chair by the window, letting the stillness of the room mirror the stillness of the night. She reflected on the unusual intimacy of silence, how it could carry more meaning than words ever could. The walk had stretched longer than it should have, she realized, because attention and presence had filled every corner of it. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every unspoken thought had been magnified in the quiet, and in that she felt the profound beauty of it all. She wondered if Lucas too felt the echo of the evening, the gentle gravity of a short walk transformed into something lasting. She hoped he did, silently, because it meant the moments weren't hers alone. They belonged to both of them now, suspended delicately in memory. Marielle's room grew darker as the night deepened, but she didn't reach for the light. She wanted to hold on to the soft shadows, to the feeling that had filled the evening. It wasn't about endings, she realized. It was about noticing, about treasuring small stretches of time that might otherwise pass unremarked. Tonight had been ordinary in steps, but extraordinary in weight, and that made all the difference. With a deep breath, she leaned back in her chair, letting the quiet wash over her. The memory of Lucas beside her, the gentle rhythm of footsteps, the shared glances, and the pauses in conversation, all of it lingered, warm and tender, longer than it should have. It was remarkable, she thought, how something so simple could leave such a mark, and she smiled softly, knowing she would carry it with her, quietly, forever. As Marielle finally closed her eyes, the night outside seemed to settle into a calm of its own, a perfect echo of the gentle tension that had carried her home. There was no need for more words. The memory alone was enough, a brief walk that had stretched into something far greater, delicate and unforgettable, a quiet reminder that even ordinary moments could leave extraordinary traces. The night deepened, carrying with it the soft glow of an evening that lingered far longer than it had any reason to. And somewhere, on another quiet street, Lucas was walking too, perhaps thinking the same thing, that 15 minutes could stretch into hours when shared with someone who notices. The memory of that evening, like a gentle echo, would remain in both their minds, a soft, lasting testament to the quiet, enduring power of presence.